Hello everyone, welcome back to Angelical Balance. You know that feeling late at night when the world gets quiet and something just feels off? That's what we're all about here. Real stories, real fear, the kind that stays with you long after you turn the lights back on. I'm your host, and tonight's story, it's a heavy one. But before we get into it, if you're here for the chills, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Doesn't matter if you're in New York, Texas, or some quiet town that only comes alive after midnight. I want to know I'm not the only one who gets that uneasy feeling when the night sets in. All right, headphones on, lights down. Story 1 comes from Derek Hoffman, Albany, New York. I used to work security at the Riverside Medical Center in Albany back in 2019. It was one of those old hospitals that had been expanded over the years. New wings grafted onto a building that dated back to the 1920s. The original structure had been a tuberculosis sanatorium, which nobody liked to talk about, but you could feel it in the bones of the place. The night shift paid an extra $3 an hour, and I needed the money, so I took it without hesitation. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 4 nights a week. Most of it was walking rounds through empty corridors, checking doors, watching monitors in the security office. The hospital never really slept. There were always nurses on the floors, doctors on call, patients being wheeled to emergency surgery. But there were pockets of deep silence in the older sections that felt wrong somehow. Like the building was holding its breath. I'd been on the job for about 2 months when I first noticed the elevator problem. The hospital had 6 elevators total, 4 modern ones in the main building, and 2 older service elevators in the east wing, the original part of the structure. Hospital policy said those old elevators were for staff and equipment only, not for patients or visitors. They were slow, noisy things that groaned and rattled as they moved between floors. I usually avoided them when I could. It was a Tuesday night in late October. I was doing my rounds on the 4th floor of the east wing, checking that the storage rooms were locked, when I heard one of the service elevators moving. The mechanical whir and the clank of the old cables were distinctive. I could track its progress by the floor indicator above the doors, an ancient brass needle behind cloudy glass that moved from B to 1, then 1 to 2. It stopped on the 4th floor. My floor. I stood there in the hallway, hand on my flashlight, waiting to see who would step out. Maybe a janitor, maybe someone from dietary bringing up supplies. The elevator doors were the old-fashioned kind that you had to pull open manually from the outside. I watched them waiting. Nobody came out. The indicator needle stayed pointing at 4. The elevator hummed quietly, waiting. After a full minute, I walked over and pulled the outer door open. The inner gate was already open, which was odd. People usually closed it behind them. The elevator car was empty. Completely empty. Just scuffed linoleum floor and yellowed walls, lit by a single flickering bulb. I checked the hallway in both directions. Nobody. The 4th floor of the east wing was mostly storage and old records. Nobody came up here much, especially not at 1 in the morning. I closed the elevator doors and continued my rounds, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling settling into my chest. Old elevators were quirky. Maybe someone had called it and then taken the stairs. It wasn't worth worrying about. But it happened again the next night. Same time, almost exactly 1 a.m. I was on the 3rd floor when I heard the elevator moving. This time, I watched the indicator from down the hall. Basement to 1st. 1st to 2nd. 2nd to 3rd. It stopped on my floor again. I approached the doors and waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Nobody emerged. I yanked the door open. Empty car, inner gate hanging open. "Hello," I called into the elevator. My voice sounded small and foolish. This isn't funny if someone's messing around. No response. Just the hum of the elevator motor and that flickering bulb casting nervous shadows. I radioed down to Central Security. "Hey, Mike, you seeing anything weird on the cameras for the East Wing elevators?" Static, then Mike's bored voice. "Negative." "Why?" "One of them keeps coming to my floor with nobody in it." "Probably just a mechanical thing, man. Those elevators are ancient." "Put in a maintenance request." I did, but the maintenance guy who came out the next day found nothing wrong. "Elevators work fine," he told me, wiping grease from his hands. "Maybe someone's hitting the button and walking away. Pranks or whatever." But I knew that wasn't it. The East Wing was practically deserted at night. And the service elevators didn't have call buttons on every floor, only on basement, first and fifth. You couldn't call it to the third or fourth floor unless you were already inside the car. The fourth night, I decided to do something stupid. I was going to ride the elevator. At 12:55 a.m., I positioned myself in the fourth floor hallway near the service elevator. I had my flashlight, my radio, and a growing sense that I was making a terrible mistake. But I needed to know what was happening. Working night shift in a creepy hospital was one thing. Working night shift in a creepy hospital where elevators seemed to have minds of their own was something else entirely. At exactly 1:02 a.m., I heard the elevator start moving. Basement to first. First to second. I took a breath and pressed the down button mounted on the wall, one of the only call buttons in the East Wing. The elevator stopped on the second floor for a moment, and my heart hammered. Then it continued up. Second to third. Third to fourth. The doors arrived. I pulled them open. Empty car. Flickering light. Open inner gate. I stepped inside before I could change my mind. The floor creaked under my weight. The air smelled like machine oil and something else. Something organic and unpleasant, like old flowers or meat starting to turn. I pulled the outer door closed, then the inner gate, the metal rattling in my hands. The control panel had buttons for B, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I pressed 1, wanting to get back down to the main level where there were people and light and normalcy. Nothing happened. I pressed it again. The button clicked but didn't illuminate. The elevator didn't move. "Come on," I muttered, pressing it harder. I tried the door open button. Nothing. I tried pulling the inner gate open, but it wouldn't budge. It was like it had locked into place. Then the elevator started moving on its own. Not down. Up. The floor lurched beneath me, and I grabbed the handrail. The brass needle on the interior indicator began to climb. 4 to 5. My stomach dropped as we rose. The fifth floor of the East Wing had been closed for renovations for the past year. Asbestos abatement, someone had told me. It was completely sealed off, with plastic sheeting over the stairwell doors and warning signs posted. Nobody was supposed to be up there. The elevator stopped. The flickering bulb cast crazy shadows. I stood there breathing hard, staring at the closed doors. Then they opened. Both doors, inner and outer, sliding and rattling open on their own. The fifth floor was dark. My flashlight beam cut through the blackness, illuminating plastic sheeting that hung from the ceiling like dirty curtains. The air was thick with dust, and that same rotten flower smell, much stronger now. I could see the hallway stretching away into darkness, doorways like missing teeth on either side. I didn't want to get out. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in the elevator, to ride it back down. But as I stood there, frozen, I heard something. Footsteps. Slow, shuffling footsteps coming from somewhere down that dark hallway. Not the sharp click of shoes or the squeak of sneakers. Something softer. Dragging. I jabbed at the button for the first floor. Pressed it over and over. Come on, come on, come on. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear breathing now, wet and raspy. My flashlight beam shook as I pointed it down the hallway, but I couldn't see anyone. Just plastic sheeting moving slightly, as if something had brushed past it. The elevator doors started to close. Just before they shut completely, my flashlight beam caught something at the edge of the hallway. A figure standing just beyond the plastic sheeting. Tall and thin, wearing what looked like a hospital gown. But wronged. All wronged. The proportions were off, the arms too long, the head tilted at an angle that made my stomach lurch. The doors banged shut and the elevator dropped. My knees buckled and I fell against the wall, my breath coming in gasps. The car rattled and shook as it descended. 5 to 4, 4 to 3, 3 to 2, 2 to 1. When the doors opened on the first floor, I practically fell out. A nurse walking by grabbed my arm. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I couldn't speak. I just nodded and stumbled toward the security office, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my flashlight. I told Mike what happened. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. You probably just spooked yourself, man. Old building, middle of the night. Your brain plays tricks. I know what I saw. Did you see anything, though? Really? Or did you see shadows and plastic sheeting and fill in the rest? I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. Maybe he was right. Maybe I'd psyched myself out. But I knew what I'd felt in that elevator. Pure primal terror. I requested to be transferred to the main building. They moved me the following week. I told myself I'd never go back to the East Wing. But curiosity is a terrible thing. 3 weeks later, on a slow night, I found myself pulling up the hospital's old records on the security office computer. I searched for information about the 5th floor, about what it had been used for. What I found made my blood run cold. The 5th floor had been the isolation ward. When the building was a tuberculosis sanatorium, that's where they kept the terminal patients. The ones who were too far gone, too contagious, too dangerous to house with the others. According to the records I found, 53 patients had died on that floor between 1927 and 1943. But that wasn't the worst part. In 1938, there had been an incident. A patient named Thomas Merritt, suffering from late-stage tuberculosis, and what the records delicately called nervous exhaustion, had escaped from his room. They found him 3 days later in one of the service elevator shafts. The report was vague about the details, but reading between the lines, I understood he'd forced the elevator doors open and climbed into the shaft. They found his body at the bottom, but the report noted that the elevator car showed signs of significant trauma and had been taken out of service for repairs. The timestamp on the incident report showed the date of discovery, October 23, 1938. I checked the calendar. The night I'd ridden the elevator, the night it had taken me to the 5th floor, had been October 23, 2019. 81 years to the day. I sat there in the security office, the glow of the computer screen washing over me, and I felt cold sweat break out across my back. The elevator hadn't been malfunctioning. It had been following a pattern. An anniversary. Mike came in with coffee and found me staring at the screen. You okay, Derek? You look like hell. I need to tell you something, I said, about Thomas Merritt. I explained what I'd found. Mike listened, his expression shifting from skepticism to unease. So you're saying the elevator is what? Haunted. I'm saying something is wrong with that elevator. Or that floor. Or both. Mike was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Look, I've worked here for 6 years. Night shift the whole time. And yeah, weird stuff happens. Sounds you can't explain. Shadows that move wrong. But we don't talk about it because, what's the point? We need the job. The hospital needs security. Life goes on. But, let it go, Derek. Work your shift in the main building. Don't go back to the East Wing. Forget what you saw." I wanted to argue, but what could I say? What could either of us do? File a report saying the hospital was haunted. We'd be laughed out of our jobs. So I tried to forget. I worked the main building for the next 2 months. December came, then January. I avoided the East Wing entirely, taking the long way around even during the day. Other security guards rotated through, and I never heard any complaints about the elevators. Life went on, like Mike had said. But in late January, I was assigned to cover a shift in the East Wing. Someone had called in sick, and they needed bodies. It was just for one night, they said. Just walk the rounds, check the doors, no big deal. I thought about refusing, but I needed the job. I had rent due and student loans breathing down my neck. One shift. I could handle one shift. The night started normally enough. I did my rounds on the first floor, then the second, then the third. I avoided looking at the service elevators. At 12:45 a.m., I headed up to the fourth floor via the stairwell. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. That held breath feeling was back, stronger than ever. At 1:00 a.m. exactly, I heard the elevator start moving. I should have walked away. I should have gone down the stairs and radioed for someone else to cover the fourth floor. But instead, I found myself walking toward the sound, toward the brass indicator needle climbing slowly. Beta 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. The elevator stopped on my floor. I stood there 10 feet from the doors, my flashlight heavy in my hand. The elevator hummed, waiting. The outer door cracked open an inch. Just an inch. Like an invitation. I could see the edge of the car through the gap. The flickering light. And something else. A shadow. Moving inside the empty car. I took a step back. Then another. The outer door opened wider, the metal groaning. The inner gate rattled but stayed closed. Through the metal grid, I could see the interior of the elevator. There was someone standing in the corner. Tall, thin, hospital gown hanging off impossibly long limbs. Head tilted at that same wrong angle I'd seen before. But now I could see the face. Gray skin stretched too tight over bone. Eyes that were dark hollows. Mouth open in a silent scream or gasp, revealing teeth too white, too sharp. It stared at me through the gate. I ran. I didn't think, didn't plan, just turned and sprinted for the stairwell. Behind me, I heard the elevator gate crash open. Heard those shuffling footsteps following. I slammed through the stairwell door and took the stairs 3 at a time. My breath ragged in my throat. I didn't stop until I reached the security office. Mike was at the desk, and he jumped up when he saw me. What the hell? It's real, I gasped. It's real. I saw it. In the elevator. We need to. Slow down. What did you see? I told him. Everything. The figure in the elevator. The way it had looked at me. Mike's face went pale. I believe you, he said quietly. I've seen it too. Once, 5 years ago. I couldn't talk about it. Who would believe me? What is it? I don't know. But I know it's dangerous. We need to stay away from that elevator. Both of us. We filed an incident report saying there was a mechanical issue with the East Wing service elevators, and they should be taken out of service immediately. Maintenance came out the next day. They found nothing wrong with the elevators mechanically. But when they opened the shaft to inspect the cables, they found something else. Scratches. Long, deep scratches running down the concrete walls of the shaft. Like something with very long fingers had been climbing. Or crawling. The scratches went from the 5th floor down to the basement. Hundreds of them. Some looked old, worn smooth by time. Others looked fresh. The hospital quietly sealed the service elevators after that. Welded the doors shut on every floor. The official reason was structural concerns and pending renovation. They moved all East Wing operations that required elevator access to the main building. I quit a week later. Found a new job doing security at a shopping mall. Better hours, less pay, but I didn't care. I couldn't be in that building anymore. Couldn't walk those hallways knowing what lived in the darkness. Mike still works there. We get coffee sometimes, and he tells me the East Wing is quieter now. No more phantom elevator rides. No more flickering lights in sealed shafts. But sometimes, he says, late at night, you can hear something moving behind the welded doors. Shuffling back and forth, waiting. I drive past Riverside Medical Center, sometimes on my way home. The East Wing is dark, scheduled for demolition next year. They're going to tear it down and build a new parking structure. I hope they do. I hope they rip that building down to its foundation and salt the earth beneath it. But I know deep in my bones that it won't matter. Whatever Thomas Merritt became in that elevator shaft, whatever walked those 5th floor halls for 81 years, things like that don't just go away. They wait, and they remember. And on certain nights, on certain anniversaries, they ride. Story 2 comes from Rachel Pemberton, East Texas. I grew up in a small town called Carthage in East Texas, but this story takes place about 30 miles outside of town, where the pine forests get so thick that daylight barely touches the ground. This happened 5 years ago in the summer of 2020, when I was working night shift at a natural gas compression station. For those who don't know, compression stations are facilities that keep natural gas moving through pipelines. They're usually located in remote areas, and they run 24/7. Someone has to be on site at all times to monitor the equipment, check pressure gauges, and respond to alarms. The pay was excellent, nearly twice what I could make anywhere else in the area, and the work itself wasn't particularly hard. Just lonely. The station I worked at was called Pine Ridge CS7. It sat in a clearing carved out of dense forest, surrounded by loblolly pines that stretched up 70, 80 feet tall. The nearest town was 15 miles away. The nearest house was probably 10 miles. During my 12-hour shifts from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., I was completely alone except for the constant rumble of the compressor engines and the occasional deer or coyote that wandered through the perimeter lights. The facility itself was small, just 3 compressor buildings, a control room where I spent most of my time, and a small break room with a couch, microwave, and coffee maker. Everything was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Security cameras covered the entrances and the main equipment. It was about as secure and isolated as you could get. I'd been working there for about 4 months when I started noticing the footprints. It was late July, miserably hot even at night. The humidity in East Texas in summer is like breathing through a wet blanket. I'd gone outside around midnight to do a visual inspection of the compressor units. Standard procedure. Just walking around with a flashlight to make sure nothing was leaking or overheating. The ground around the facility was mostly gravel and hard-packed dirt. But near the back fence, where the forest pressed closest to the compound, there was a patch of sandy soil that never quite dried out. When I shined my flashlight across it, I saw them. Footprints, bare feet, human-sized but wrong somehow. The toes were too long, splayed out wide like someone had been walking on their tiptoes. There were 4 or 5 prints leading from the fence toward the compressor buildings, then disappearing onto the gravel. I stood there staring at them, my flashlight beam steady on the impressions in the sand. They looked fresh, sharp edges, no sign of erosion from wind or rain. Someone had been here recently, maybe even tonight. I checked the fence line. No holes, no places where someone could have climbed over easily. The barbed wire was intact. The gate was locked with a heavy chain and padlock. I checked the security cameras when I got back to the control room, scrolling through the footage from the past few hours. Nothing. No movement except for a raccoon that had wandered past around 11:30. I told myself it must have been from a previous night, before the last rain. Maybe a transient had been passing through the area. East Texas has its share of homeless folks who live rough in the woods, though I'd never heard of any this far out. I filed a note in the daily log and tried to forget about it. But the footprints came back. 3 nights later, I found them again. Same location, same strange splayed toe pattern. This time there were more of them. A clear trail leading from the fence to the side of compressor building 2, then back to the fence and disappearing into the woods. I called my supervisor, a gruff man named Dale who'd been in the oil and gas industry for 30 years. Probably just some kids messing around, he said over the phone. You know how bored teenagers get out in the country. They think it's funny to spook the night shift guy. Dale, there's nobody out here. The nearest house is 10 miles away. So maybe it's hunters, poachers. Put up a few more no trespassing signs, and if you see anyone, call the sheriff. But don't get worked up about footprints. I put up more signs. I started carrying a can of pepper spray on my belt, even though I felt ridiculous doing it. And I kept checking those cameras obsessively, scrolling through hours of footage looking for any sign of who or what was leaving those prints. I never saw anything. The cameras showed an empty facility, the occasional animal, and me walking my rounds. But every few nights, the footprints would be there. Always in the same sandy patch. Always leading to and from the compressor buildings. Then the sound started. It was a Tuesday night in early August. I was in the control room, monitoring the pressure gauges and filling out paperwork. The windows were closed and the AC was running, the only way to survive a Texas summer. Around 2 a.m., I heard something over the rumble of the compressors. The scratching. It was coming from outside, near the back of the control room. Long, slow scratches, like fingernails dragging across metal. I muted the radio and listened. The sound continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. The night was pitch black beyond the perimeter lights, the forest a solid wall of darkness. I walked around the control room building, shining my light across the metal siding. Nothing, no marks, no damage. But when I walked to the back corner, I found something that made my stomach drop. Handprints in the dust on the window. The windows were about 7 feet off the ground. Someone would have needed a ladder to reach them. But these prints weren't normal. The fingers were too long, the palm too narrow. And there were only 4 fingers on each hand. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding. The rational part of my brain was scrambling for explanations. A raccoon could have climbed up there. Animals have weird paw prints. It didn't mean anything. But I knew better. I'd seen enough animal tracks growing up in East Texas to know the difference. These were hands. Human-like, but not human. I spent the rest of the shift in the control room with the door locked, watching the security monitors and jumping at every sound. When my relief arrived at 7 a.m., I must have looked like hell because he immediately asked if I was feeling all right. Fine, I lied. Just a long night. I went home and barely slept. I kept seeing those handprints in my mind. 4 fingers. 7 feet up. I almost quit. I came very close to calling Dale and telling him I was done. But I needed the money. My mom had been sick. The medical bills were piling up, and this job paid twice what I could make anywhere else. I couldn't afford to quit over what might just be an elaborate prank or my own paranoid imagination. So I went back the next night. Everything was normal until about 1 a.m. I was doing my rounds, checking the compressor units when I heard the sound. A singing. It was coming from the woods beyond the back fence. A woman's voice, high and clear, singing something I couldn't quite make out. No words, just a melody that rose and fell in strange intervals. It was beautiful and deeply unsettling at the same time. I stood frozen near compressor building 2, my flashlight beam pointing uselessly at the ground. The singing continued for maybe 2 minutes, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded small and stupid. "This is private property. You need to leave." No response. Just the rumble of the compressors and the clicking of insects in the darkness. I hurried back to the control room and locked the door. I watched the cameras, but they showed nothing except darkness beyond the fence line. I filed another report in the daily log, noting the singing, the handprints, the footprints. I knew I sounded crazy. I was starting to wonder if I was crazy. But then Dale called me the next afternoon, before my shift started. "Rachel, I need to ask you something. Have you been drinking on the job?" "What?" "No. Dale, I don't even drink. You know that. I'm looking at your reports from the past 2 weeks. Footprints singing, handprints on windows 7 feet up. Corporate is starting to ask questions. They think you're either drinking or you're having some kind of breakdown. I'm not making this up. Something is out there. Something is. Listen to me. I believe that you believe something's happening. But I've worked in this industry for 30 years. I've worked at facilities in the middle of nowhere from West Texas to North Dakota. You know what happens to people on night shift in isolated locations. Their minds play tricks on them. The darkness, the loneliness, it gets to you. This isn't in my head. Maybe not. But unless you can show me concrete evidence, photos, video, footage, something, I can't help you. Corporate is talking about pulling you off night shift. Maybe putting you on administrative leave, pending a psych evaluation. I felt my stomach drop. Dale, I need this job. Then stop filing reports about ghost stories. Do your job, keep your head down, and try to get through your shifts without seeing bogeymen in the woods. He hung up. I sat in my truck in the driveway, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, and I felt something harden in my chest. Fine. If they wanted evidence, I'd get them evidence. That night, I brought my personal camera, a decent digital camera I'd bought years ago for a photography class I never finished. I set it up in the control room window facing the back fence, set to take time-lapse photos every 30 seconds. If something was out there, I'd catch it. The shift started normally. I did my rounds, checked the equipment, filled out my paperwork. The camera clicked away in the background, capturing the empty woods beyond the fence. Around midnight, I heard the scratching again. This time it was louder, more insistent. It sounded like it was coming from the roof of the control room. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The night was overcast, no moon, the darkness absolute beyond the perimeter lights. I walked out about 20 feet from the building and tilted my head back, shining my light across the roof. Something was up there. I saw it for maybe 2 seconds before it moved. Tall, impossibly thin, crouched on the peak of the roof like a gargoyle. Its skin was pale, not white, but a grayish color like old meat. The limbs were too long, jointed in too many places. And the hands, those four-fingered hands, were gripping the edge of the roof. Then it looked at me. I can't describe the face properly because my brain didn't want to process it. Too many angles. Eyes that reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's. A mouth that seemed to split the face too far, wider than any human mouth should go. It made a sound. Not a growl or a hiss, but that same singing I'd heard before. Beautiful and terrible. I ran. I didn't think, didn't plan, just turned and sprinted for my truck. Behind me, I heard a thud as something heavy hit the ground. Heard footsteps following, that same shuffling gait but fast. Too fast. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the lock. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear breathing now, wet and raspy. The truck door opened and I threw myself inside, slamming it shut and hitting the locks. Something crashed against the driver's side window hard enough to make the whole truck rock. I screamed and turned the key, the engine roaring to life. In the rearview mirror, illuminated by my taillights, I saw it. Standing in the middle of the gravel lot. 8 feet tall at least, maybe taller. Those impossibly long arms hanging down past its knees. Head tilted at an angle that would have broken a human neck. Watching me with those reflective eyes. I floored it. The truck fishtailed on the gravel, headlights swinging wildly, and I pointed it at the gate. I didn't slow down. I hit the chain link gate doing 40 miles an hour, and it exploded open in a shriek of tearing metal. I drove for 20 minutes before I pulled over on the side of Highway 59, shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel. I called 911. There's something at the Pine Ridge compression station, I told the dispatcher. Something dangerous. You need to send someone. Ma'am, what kind of emergency is this? I don't know. An animal, maybe. Something big. It attacked me. They sent a deputy out to the facility. He called me an hour later. Ma'am, I'm at the compression station. There's no sign of any animal. The gate's damaged. Looks like you hit it pretty hard. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention? Did you check the roof? Did you check the woods? I checked everything. There's nothing here. No tracks, no damage except to the gate. Look, it's dark out here, and these facilities can be spooky at night. Maybe you saw a bear or a big cat in your mind. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a cat. It was, "Why don't you head home and get some rest? I'll file a report about the gate." I went home. I didn't sleep. When the sun came up, I called Dale and quit. He tried to talk me out of it. Told me corporate was willing to overlook the gate damage if I'd see a counselor. Told me they'd move me to day shift. But I was done. I couldn't go back there. Not for any amount of money. A week later, Dale called me. "Rachel, I need to ask you something. That camera you set up in the control room, did you take it with you when you left?" "No, I forgot all about it." "Why?" "The new night shift guy found it. He reviewed the time-lapse photos." "Rachel, there's something I need to show you." He came to my apartment that afternoon with his laptop. He opened a file containing the photos from my camera. We scrolled through them, image after image of the dark woods, the fence line, nothing unusual. Then we reached the photos from that last night. At 12:47 a.m., there was a figure at the fence. Tall and pale, barely visible at the edge of the light. At 12:48, it was climbing the fence, those long limbs moving in ways that didn't look natural. At 12:49, it was on the roof. And at 12:51, it was gone. But there was something else in the frame now. More figures, at least 5 of them, standing at the tree line. All tall, all thin, all watching the facility with those reflective eyes. Dale closed the laptop. His hands were shaking. "What the hell is that?" I whispered. "I don't know, but I believe you now. And I need to tell you something. Pine Ridge isn't the first station where this has happened. 3 years ago, at a facility up near Longview, a night shift operator disappeared. They found his truck at the gate, door open, engine running. Never found him. 2 years before that, another incident at a station near Tyler. The operator quit, said she'd seen something in the woods. Corporate hushed it up, said she was having a mental health crisis. Why didn't you tell me? Because I thought it was bullshit. Urban legends. Campfire stories. I've been in this business for 30 years and I've never seen anything I couldn't explain." He paused. "Until now. What are we going to do?" "I'm shutting down Pine Ridge. Telling corporate it's a safety issue. They're not going to like it, but I don't care. Nobody else is working that station alone at night. Not after this." Pine Ridge CS7 was decommissioned 2 months later. The official reason was persistent mechanical issues and high maintenance costs. The equipment was relocated to other facilities. The site was abandoned. I found a new job, working day shift at a manufacturing plant. The pay was half what I'd been making, but I didn't care. I was around people, working in daylight, and I never had to spend another night alone in the darkness. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about those figures at the tree line. 5 of them watching the facility. And I wonder how many more there were in the woods beyond. How many of them live in those vast stretches of East Texas forest where no human ever goes. Dale retired last year. We still talk sometimes. He told me that corporate has a quiet policy now. No single person night shifts at any facility more than 20 miles from a town. They always send 2 operators. They've never officially acknowledged why the policy changed. Last month, I drove past the old Pine Ridge site. The buildings are still there, but the fence has been torn down. Nature is slowly reclaiming the clearing. Weeds growing up through the gravel, vines crawling up the sides of the compressor buildings. I didn't stop, but as I drove past, I glanced in my rearview mirror. There was something standing at the tree line. tall and pale, watching my truck drive away. I didn't look back again. I just kept driving until the forest disappeared behind me, and the lights of civilization surrounded me like a protective blanket. Some places in East Texas, the darkness goes deeper than the absence of light. And some things that live in that darkness are old. Older than the towns, older than the roads, older than any human presence in those woods. We built our facility on their territory, and they wanted us gone. I got out. The next operator might not be so lucky. Story 3 comes from James Mitchell, Maryland. I worked as a night custodian at the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum in St. Michael's, Maryland. This was 3 years ago, in the fall of 2022. The museum sits right on the water, a collection of historic buildings spread across 18 acres along the Miles River. During the day, it's a beautiful place. Restored boat shops, lighthouse, old skipjacks tied up at the docks. At night, it's something else entirely. The job was simple enough. I worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week. My responsibilities included cleaning the exhibit halls, checking that all the buildings were secure, making sure no pipes froze in winter, and generally keeping an eye on the property. The museum had a security system, but it was basic. Motion sensors in the main buildings, cameras at the entrances. Most of the structures were historic, which meant they couldn't be modified much. No central heating in some of them, original windows that rattled in the wind, floors that creaked with every step. I'd been working there for about 6 weeks when I first saw the logbook. It was in the custodian's office, a cramped room in the back of the main building that smelled like floor wax and old paper. The previous night custodian, a guy named Robert who'd worked there for 15 years, had left it in the desk drawer. It wasn't an official museum document, just a composition notebook with a black and white marbled cover. The kind you buy at any drugstore. I opened it out of curiosity. The first entry was dated September 2007. First night alone. Building 7 boat shop, has cold spot near workbench. Temperature dropped 20 degrees for no reason. Checked heating system, functioning normally. Cold spot lasted approximately 15 minutes, then vanished. No explanation. I flipped through more entries. They were sporadic, sometimes months between them, sometimes several in the same week. All of them described strange occurrences. Sounds that shouldn't be there. Objects moved. Temperature changes. Shadows that didn't match any light source. The last entry was dated August 15, 2022, about 2 weeks before I'd started. I can't do this anymore. 20 years is enough. Building 4, something is getting worse. It knows I'm leaving. It's angry. Whoever reads this, stay out of Building 4 after midnight. I mean it. Don't go in there. Building 4 was the Waterman's Wharf, a restored 19th century structure that housed exhibits about oyster fishing and crabbing. It was one of the oldest buildings on the property, relocated from somewhere else on the Chesapeake decades ago. The wood floors were worn smooth by a century of work boots, and the whole place smelled like salt water and old timber. I'd cleaned it several times already. It was just a building. Old, sure, but not particularly creepy. I'd never noticed anything unusual. I almost threw the notebook away. I didn't need the previous custodian's paranoia messing with my head. But something made me keep it. I stuck it back in the drawer and went about my work. That night, I paid more attention to Building 4. I saved it for last in my rounds, approaching it around 2 a.m. The structure sat near the waterfront, surrounded by old pilings and boat equipment. The Miles River lapped against the shore maybe 20 feet away, a constant susurrus in the darkness. Fog was rolling in off the water, thick and cold. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The motion sensor lights flickered on, old fluorescents that took a moment to warm up, casting everything in greenish light. The main room was maybe 40 feet long, filled with glass display cases showing antique fishing equipment, photographs of watermen from the 1800s, and a restored skipjack hull along one wall. I started sweeping, working my way from the back of the building toward the front. The floor creaked under my feet. Wind rattled the windows. Normal sounds for an old building. Then I heard the footsteps upstairs. I stopped sweeping. Building 4 didn't have an upstairs. It was a single-story structure with a peaked roof. I looked up at the ceiling, following the sound of footsteps as they moved from one end of the building to the other. Slow, heavy steps. Boot heels on wooden planks. The footsteps stopped directly above me. I stood there with my broom, staring at the ceiling, my heart hammering. The building was silent except for the wind and water outside. Then I heard it again, footsteps moving back the other direction. They reached the far wall and stopped. I should have left. Every instinct told me to drop the broom and walk out. But I was 24 years old and stupid, and I'd convinced myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe it was raccoons in the attic space. Maybe it was the building settling. Maybe I was hearing things. I finished sweeping as quickly as I could and got out of there. Back in the custodian's office, I pulled out the notebook and flipped through it again. I found an entry from March 2019. Building 4, footsteps in ceiling again. Checked attic space with flashlight. Nothing there. No signs of animals. No structural issues. But I can hear them almost every night now. Always between 2 and 3 a.m. Always the same pattern, walking from one end to the other, stopping, walking back. I felt cold. Robert had heard the same thing. For years, I started reading the notebook more carefully. Robert had been meticulous, documenting everything he'd experienced. The entries painted a picture of a property that was far more active than any museum should be. Every building had something. Cold spots, shadows, sounds. But Building 4 was the worst. The entries about it became more frequent and more urgent as the years progressed. November 2020, Building 4, heard voice calling my name. Male voice sounded like it was right behind me. Spun around, nobody there. February 2021, Building 4. Doorknob turned on its own while I was cleaning. Door opened 6 inches, then slammed shut. No wind. No explanation. July 2022, Building 4. Saw figure in window as I was approaching. Tall man in dark clothing. When I unlocked door and went inside, empty. Completely empty. Checked entire building. No one there. The final entries from August were the most disturbing. August 10, Building 4, it touched me. I was sweeping near the display cases, and something grabbed my shoulder. Firm grip, cold as ice. I could feel 5 distinct fingers. I turned around, and nothing was there. I'm done. I'm putting in my notice. August 15, last night. Building 4 one final time. I apologized. I told it I was leaving, and I was sorry, but I couldn't stay. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. Every display case in the building rattled. The lights flickered. Then everything stopped. Dead silence. I got the message. It doesn't want me to leave. But I have to. I can't live like this anymore. I closed the notebook and sat in a quiet office, listening to the building settle around me. I thought about Robert working here for 15 years, slowly worn down by whatever was in Building 4. I thought about that final entry. It doesn't want me to leave. I almost quit right then. But I needed the job. My wife was pregnant with our first child, and the insurance and steady paycheck were too important. I could handle a few strange noises. I could handle some footsteps and cold spots. I just had to get through the nights and not think about it too much. For the next week, I changed my routine. I cleaned Building 4 first, right after my shift started at 10 p.m. The footsteps only happened after 2 a.m., according to Robert's notes. If I finished before then, I'd be fine. It worked for a while. I'd go in, clean quickly, and get out. I never heard the footsteps. Never felt anything unusual. I started to relax, thinking maybe whatever had been there had left when Robert did. Maybe it had been attached to him somehow. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday night in late October. I just finished cleaning Building 4, got in at 10:30, cleaned, got out by 11:15. I was feeling good ahead of schedule. I moved on to the other buildings, working my way through my rounds. Around 1 a.m., I was in the main building working on the administrative offices when the security alarm went off. A piercing electronic shriek that echoed through the empty museum. I checked the control panel. Building 4, motion sensor triggered. I grabbed my flashlight and keys and headed down to the waterfront. The fog was thick now, turning the streetlights into fuzzy yellow orbs. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The Miles River was invisible, just a presence in the darkness, but I could hear it lapping at the shore. Building 4 sat wreathed in fog. The door was closed, but as I approached, I could see light flickering in the windows. Not the steady fluorescent light, something else. Something that moved. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The lights were off, but I could see clearly because every glass display case in the building was glowing. A soft, phosphorescent blue light emanated from the cases, illuminating the room in an otherworldly glow. The antique fishing equipment cast long shadows. The photographs of long-dead watermen seemed to watch me. And standing in the center of the room was a man. He was tall, dressed in dark work clothes that looked a century out of date. Heavy canvas pants, a thick wool sweater, boots caked with what looked like dried mud. His face was weathered, deeply lined, with a thick beard going gray. He stood perfectly still, staring at the restored skipjack hull. "Sir," my voice came out as a croak, "the museum is closed. You need to leave." He didn't move. Didn't acknowledge me at all. I took a step closer, raising my flashlight. The beam passed right through him. I'm not ashamed to say I made a sound, something between a gasp and a whimper. The figure turned to look at me. His eyes were dark hollows in his weathered face. When he opened his mouth, no sound came out, but I could see his lips moving. He was trying to say something. Then he pointed at the skipjack hull. His arm moved slowly, deliberately, that weathered finger extended toward the restored boat. I stood frozen, my flashlight beam shaking. The figure pointed again, more insistently. Then he began to fade. The blue glow from the display cases dimmed. Within seconds, the building was dark except for my flashlight. The man was gone. I fumbled for the light switch and flooded the room with harsh, fluorescent light. Empty. Completely empty. The display cases looked normal. The skipjack hull sat against the wall, just a piece of restored history. But where the man had been standing, the floor was wet. Not damp, soaking wet, water pooled on the old wooden planks. And the water smelled like salt and dead fish. I backed out of the building and called my supervisor. Told him the alarm had gone off, but I couldn't find any intruders. Told him I thought there might be a leak because there was water on the floor. I didn't mention the man. I didn't mention the glowing display cases. He told me to file a report, and he'd have maintenance check the building in the morning. I went back to the custodian's office and opened Robert's notebook with shaking hands. I flipped through the entries, looking for anything about a man in work clothes. I found it in an entry from 2018. Building 4 saw him again. The waterman. That's what I call him. Tall, bearded old work clothes. He's always looking at the skipjack, sometimes pointing at it. I think he's trying to tell me something, but I don't know what. I've stopped being afraid of him. He doesn't feel malicious. Just sad. Lost. There were more entries about the waterman scattered throughout the notebook. Robert had seen him dozens of times over the years. Always in Building 4, always near the skipjack. Always pointing. March 2020, did some research. The skipjack on display is the Mary Catherine, built in 1898, restored in 1975. Original owner was a man named Thomas Garrett. He worked the oyster beds for 40 years. Disappeared in 1932, took his skipjack out one morning and never came back. They found the boat 2 days later, drifting near Tilghman Island. No sign of Garrett. Some people thought he fell overboard. Others thought he'd run off, left his family. Mystery never solved. I stared at that entry for a long time. Thomas Garrett disappeared in 1932, never found. The waterman was pointing at his boat. His skipjack, the Mary Catherine. But why? What was he trying to tell us? I should have left it alone. Should have finished my shift, gone home and forgotten about it. But I couldn't. The image of that man, that ghost pointing at the boat, haunted me. He looked so desperate, so insistent. The next night, I brought tools with me. A screwdriver, a flashlight, a crowbar. When I got to Building 4, I went straight to the skipjack hull. It was displayed against the wall, the interior partially visible. Museum placards explained the restoration process, how the boat had been painstakingly rebuilt. I climbed over the velvet rope that kept visitors away from the exhibit. The hull was maybe 15 feet long, the wood dark with age and weathering. I ran my hands along the interior looking for what? I didn't know. Then I found it. A board along the bottom of the hull that didn't quite match the others. It looked original, darker, more weathered, but it sat slightly raised like it had been removed and replaced many times. I worked my screwdriver into the gap and pried. The board came loose easily, like it had never been properly fastened. Underneath was a hollow space, and inside that space was a metal box. It was about the size of a shoebox, made of tin that had oxidized green with age. My hands shook as I pulled it out. It was surprisingly heavy. I carried it over to one of the display tables and carefully opened the lid. Inside were papers, documents wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from moisture. I unwrapped them carefully, spreading them out under my flashlight. Deed to a property, marriage certificate, birth certificates for 3 children, letters written in careful, sloping handwriting, and at the bottom, a journal. I opened the journal to the last entry. It was dated October 15, 1932. I can't go on. The debts are too much. The oyster beds are dying, and I can't feed my family. They'll take the house, take the boat, take everything. Mary and the children deserve better than a failure. I've made my decision. Tomorrow I'll take the Mary Catherine out one last time. They'll think I fell overboard. Accident. Mary will get the insurance money. It's the only way. I sat down hard on the floor, the journal shaking in my hands. Thomas Garrett hadn't disappeared. He'd killed himself, staged it to look like an accident, so his family would get the insurance payout. And he'd hidden all the important documents, the deed to his property, the birth certificates, everything his family would need, in the boat. But something had gone wrong. Maybe the insurance company hadn't paid out. Maybe his family had never found the documents. Maybe they'd lost everything anyway. And Thomas Garrett's ghost had been trying to tell someone for 90 years. I gathered up all the documents carefully and brought them to my supervisor the next morning. Told him I'd been doing some cleaning in Building 4 and found them hidden in the skipjack hull. Didn't mention how I'd known where to look. The museum was thrilled. Historic documents, a mystery solved, a human interest story. They contacted genealogists and tracked down Garrett's descendants, great-grandchildren living in Baltimore. The documents were preserved and put on display. The Garrett family got their ancestors' papers back. The museum got a new exhibit. And I went back to work that night, nervous about what I might find in Building 4. The waterman was there, standing in his usual spot near the skipjack. But he looked different. The desperation was gone from his posture. He saw me and nodded, just once a simple acknowledgement. Then he smiled. Not a big smile, just a slight upturn of his weathered face. He placed one hand over his heart, and I understood. Thank you. He faded away. The blue glow from the display cases dimmed. And I knew somehow that I wouldn't see him again. I was right. I worked at the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum for 2 more years before moving on to a better job. I cleaned Building 4 hundreds of times. I never heard footsteps in the ceiling again. Never saw lights I couldn't explain. Never felt that presence watching me. Whatever Thomas Garrett had been waiting for, he'd finally found it. His family knew the truth. His sacrifice hadn't been forgotten. He could rest. I left Robert's notebook in the desk drawer when I quit, but I added my own entries first. Documented what I'd experienced. Explained how I'd found the documents. And on the last page, I wrote a note for whoever came after me. Most of what's in this notebook is real. The buildings are old, and they remember things. If you hear footsteps, if you see shadows, don't panic. Not everything that lingers after death is evil. Some ghosts just have unfinished business. Some of them just need help. Building 4 is quiet now. But stay alert. This is a maritime museum full of artifacts from 200 years of Chesapeake Bay history. Ships have sunk. Sailors have drowned. Watermen have disappeared. Their stories are in these walls, in these buildings, in the very timbers and nails. If something tries to tell you something, listen. You might be the only one who can help. I don't know if the current custodian has found the notebook. I don't know if they've experienced anything unusual. I drive past the museum sometimes when I'm visiting the area, and it always looks peaceful in the moonlight. The old buildings standing sentinel along the waterfront, keeping their secrets. But sometimes, late at night, I think about Thomas Garrett. I think about how desperate he must have been, how much he must have loved his family to make that choice. And I think about his ghost, waiting decade after decade for someone to understand, someone to help. I'm glad I was there. I'm glad I listened. The dead have stories too. Sometimes they just need someone willing to hear them. My wife asks me sometimes if I believe in ghosts. I always tell her the truth. I don't believe in them. I know they're real. I've met one, and I helped him go home. Story 4 comes from David Kowalski, Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. I worked security at a grain elevator outside Winnipeg during the winter of 2018. For those unfamiliar with grain elevators, they're massive concrete structures, sometimes over 100 feet tall, used for storing wheat, barley, and other crops. The one I worked at was called Prairie Star Terminal, located about 40 kilometers outside the city in the middle of flat farmland that stretched to the horizon in every direction. Winter in Manitoba is brutal. We're talking minus 30 Celsius on a good day, minus 40 with the wind chill. The kind of cold that burns exposed skin in minutes, that turns your breath to ice crystals, that makes metal so brittle it can snap. The landscape becomes a featureless white void where sky and snow blend together, where you can lose all sense of direction in seconds. The elevator operated year-round, but winter was slower. Fewer trucks coming in, less grain moving. They only needed one security guard on the night shift instead of 2. That's where I came in. I was 26, had just finished a diploma in law enforcement, and was looking for experience before applying to the RCMP. The pay was decent, and the work seemed straightforward. Monitor the cameras, do walking patrols of the facility, make sure nobody broke in or vandalized equipment. The facility consisted of the main elevator building, several storage annexes, a truck scale, an office building, and various pieces of equipment spread across about 10 acres. Everything was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Security cameras covered the entrances and loading areas. I had a small heated office in the main building where I spent most of my time, watching monitors and doing paperwork. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., Sunday through Thursday. The first few weeks were mind-numbingly boring. Nothing happened. Occasionally, a coil would trigger a motion sensor. Once a truck driver showed up at 3 a.m., lost and looking for directions. But mostly it was just me, the darkness, and the constant howl of the prairie wind. The elevator made sounds at night. Lots of sounds. Metal expanding and contracting in the temperature changes. Grain settling in the storage bins. The building creaking like a ship at sea. I got used to it. White noise, background to my rounds and paperwork. Then in late January, we had a cold snap. The temperature dropped to minus 45 Celsius. Minus 55 with a wind chill. The kind of cold that makes the snow squeak under your boots. That makes the air hurt to breathe even through a scarf. That's when I started hearing the other sounds. It was a Tuesday night, around 1 a.m. I was in the office doing a crossword puzzle when I heard it through the walls. Footsteps. Heavy boots on metal stairs. They were coming from somewhere inside the elevator, the tall storage section with the grain bins. I muted the radio and listened. The footsteps continued, climbing steadily. Up and up and up. The main elevator had stairs that ran the full height of the building, over 30 floors. Someone was climbing those stairs. I grabbed my flashlight and radio and headed into the elevator proper. The interior was a maze of catwalks, conveyors, storage bins, and machinery. Most of it was shut down for the night, everything silent except for the wind screaming outside and the building's usual creaks and groans. And the footsteps. I could still hear them, echoing from somewhere above. Security, I called out. Identify yourself. The footsteps stopped. I stood at the bottom of the main stairwell, shining my flashlight up into the darkness. The stairs climbed up and up, metal grating that allowed you to see straight down to the bottom. My light didn't reach very far, just illuminated the first few flights before being swallowed by shadows. "This is private property," I called again. "You need to come down here right now." The silence, just the wind and the building settling. I started climbing. The stairs were cold enough that I could feel it through my gloves when I touched the railing. My breath came out in clouds. As I climbed, I swept my flashlight back and forth, checking each level. Storage bins stretched away into darkness on either side. Everything looked secure. No signs of intrusion. I made it up 10 floors, maybe 100 feet before I stopped. It was too cold to keep going, and I was starting to feel dizzy from the climb and the altitude. If someone was up there, they'd have to come down eventually. I'd wait them out. I radioed my supervisor, a guy named Tom who handled the day-to-day operations. "Tom, I've got a possible intruder in the main elevator. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Check the first 10 floors, nothing yet. Check the entry logs. Anyone's sign in that shouldn't be there." I went back to the office and checked. No entries. The gate was locked. Cameras showed no vehicles except my truck. Nobody had come in. Negative. No entries. But I definitely heard someone on the stairs. Tom was quiet for a moment. Could have been the building. These old elevators make all kinds of noise in the cold. It sounded like footsteps. "Well, finish your patrol and write it up. If you hear it again, call the RCMP." I completed my rounds and tried to forget about it. But it nagged at me. The footsteps had been too regular, too deliberate. Not random creaking. The next night, I heard them again. Same time, around 1 a.m. Boots on metal stairs climbing steadily upward. This time, I didn't call out. I just grabbed my flashlight and started climbing, moving as quietly as I could. The footsteps stayed ahead of me. I'd climb 5 floors and hear them 10 floors above. I'd climb 10 floors and hear them 20 floors above. It was like whoever, or whatever, was up there was pacing me, staying just out of sight. I made it to the 20th floor before I had to stop. My lungs burned from breathing the cold air, and I was sweating inside my parka despite the temperature. I stood on the metal landing, catching my breath, and listened. The footsteps had stopped again. Then I heard something else. A voice. Faint, barely audible over the wind, but definitely a voice. It was coming from above, maybe 5 or 6 floors up. "Help." Just one word stretched out and echoing. A man's voice, rough and desperate. "Help me." "Where are you?" I shouted up the stairwell. No response. The voice didn't call again. I stood there shaking, from cold, from exertion, from fear, and I realized something. If someone was genuinely trapped up there, calling for help, why didn't they come down? Why stay up there in the darkness and cold? Because they can't, something in my mind whispered. Because they're not really there. I descended as fast as I dared, my boots clanging on the metal stairs. Back in the office, I locked the door and sat at my desk, trying to calm down. I pulled up the building's history on the computer, looking for any incidents, any accidents. I found it in a file dated March 1997. A maintenance worker named Curtis Hammond had fallen from the top level of the grain elevator. He'd been doing an inspection alone, violation of safety protocols, and had somehow lost his footing on the catwalk. He'd fallen 32 floors, hitting multiple platforms and railings on the way down. The report was clinical in its language, but reading between the lines, I understood it had been catastrophic. They'd found his body at the bottom of the main stairwell. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. Curtis Hammond had died in the exact location where I'd been standing, hearing those footsteps and that voice calling for help. I didn't want to go back to work the next night. I seriously considered calling in sick. But I needed the job, needed the experience for my RCMP application. And it was just sounds, just echoes. It couldn't hurt me. I kept telling myself that as I drove through the dark prairie night, as I unlocked the gate and pulled into the facility. Just sounds, just my imagination working overtime in an old building during a cold snap. But at 1:07 a.m., I heard the footsteps again. And this time, they were descending. Heavy boots on metal stairs, coming down from somewhere high above. Slow and steady, one step at a time. I sat frozen in my office chair, listening as they descended. Down and down and down. They reached the ground floor. I could hear them in the main corridor now, just outside my office. The footsteps stopped directly in front of my door. I stared at the door handle, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. The handle didn't move. Nothing tried to open the door. But I could sense something on the other side. A presence, patient and waiting. Then I heard the voice again, much closer now. Right outside the door. Help me. Please. So cold. My mouth was dry. I couldn't have spoken if I'd wanted to. I just sat there paralyzed while that voice pleaded. So cold. Can't find my way down. Help me. Something scraped against the door, like fingernails or work gloves dragging across metal. Please. I don't know how long I sat there. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Eventually, the scraping stopped. The presence faded. When I finally worked up the courage to check the security cameras, the corridor outside my office was empty. But when I reviewed the footage from the past hour, I saw something that made my blood run cold. At 1:07 a.m., a shadow had appeared at the far end of the corridor. Not a person, just a darkness, a human-shaped void in the fluorescent light. It had moved down the corridor toward my office, leaving a trail of frost on the floor and walls. The temperature readout in the corner of the screen showed the corridor dropping from 12 degrees Celsius to -30 in the span of 2 minutes. The shadow had stopped at my door, stood there, then faded away, and the temperature had slowly returned to normal. I called Tom at home. I didn't care that it was 3 in the morning. There's something in the elevator. Something wrong. I'm not coming back. David, slow down. What happened? I told him everything. The footsteps, the voice, Curtis Hammond's accident, the shadow on the camera footage. It all came pouring out. Tom listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I should have warned you, he finally said. I should have told you before you started. Told me what? Curtis Hammond. He didn't just fall. Look, the official report says accident, but the guys who worked here back then, they tell a different story. Curtis had been acting strange for weeks before he died. Paranoid. Kept saying he heard things in the building, saw things moving in the corners of his vision. His supervisor wanted to send him home, get him checked out, but Curtis refused. Said he needed to finish his inspection. What happened to him? They think he had some kind of mental break. Hypothermia, maybe. He was found at the bottom of the stairwell, but the weird thing was his body temperature. The medical examiner said he'd been exposed to extreme cold for hours before he fell. But the elevator was heated. There was no way he should have been that cold. Jesus. After Curtis died, other workers started reporting things. Footsteps, voices, cold spots. Management brought in some people too. I don't know what you'd call it. Cleanse the place. It's all unofficial, not in any records. They thought it worked. Things quieted down for years. Until now. Until this cold snap. Maybe the extreme cold is triggering something. Maybe Curtis is confused, thinks he's still alive, still trying to get out of the building. I don't know. I don't understand this stuff. I can't work there anymore, Tom. I just can't. I get it. I'll have to bring someone else in. Maybe 2 people. Nobody should be alone in that place. I finished out my shift that night, but I didn't leave the office. I sat with the door locked, watching the cameras, counting down the minutes until 6 a.m. when I could leave. The footsteps came twice more. Once at 3 a.m. climbing up. Once at 4:30 coming down. Each time I heard that voice calling for help, growing more desperate. It's so cold. Can't get out. Help me, please. I didn't respond. Didn't open the door. Just waited it out. When my relief arrived at 6 a.m., Tom had come in himself. I packed up my stuff and left. I never went back to Prairie Star Terminal. Tom called me a few days later. They'd shut down night operations temporarily, brought in some kind of spiritual advisor or medium. I don't know the details. Tom said things seemed better after that. Quieter, but they implemented a new policy. Never fewer than 2 people on site during night shift. Nobody works alone. I found a different security job at a shopping mall in Winnipeg. Boring work, but at least it was warm and well lit, and had no history of workers falling to their deaths. But I still think about Curtis Hammond sometimes. I think about him climbing those stairs in the darkness and cold, confused and scared, calling for help that never came. Falling through 32 floors of metal and concrete. And somehow, some part of him stayed behind. Trapped in his last moments, endlessly climbing and falling, climbing and falling. Manitoba winters are long and harsh. The cold is relentless, seeping into everything, preserving things that should decay. Maybe that's what happened to Curtis. The cold preserved something of him in that building, some echo of his last terrified hours. I heard through the grapevine that Prairie Star Terminal was sold last year. New owners, new management. They're planning to modernize the facility, upgrade everything. Maybe that will help. Maybe tearing out the old infrastructure, replacing the stairs where Curtis died, will finally let him rest. Or maybe it won't matter. Maybe some places hold onto their ghosts, no matter what you do. I don't go out to the prairie anymore if I can help it. I stay in the city where there are people and lights and warmth. Where the darkness doesn't stretch on forever and the cold doesn't feel quite so hostile. But on the coldest nights, when the wind howls through Winnipeg and the temperature drops to -40, I sometimes wake up and hear it. Faint but distinct. Boots on metal stairs. A voice calling from somewhere far away. Help me. Please. So cold. And I pull my blankets tighter and remind myself that I'm safe, I'm warm. I'm nowhere near that elevator. But the voice follows me anyway, echoing in my memory. Curtis Hammond is still climbing those stairs. Still calling for help. Still trapped in the cold and darkness, unable to find his way home. I couldn't help him. Nobody could. Some people die alone, and some people die lost. Curtis Hammond was both. And on the coldest nights on the Manitoba prairie, he's still trying to find his way out. Story 5 comes from Sarah Chen, Markula, Queensland, Australia. I worked as a night shift lifeguard at a water park called Pacific Waves in Markula, on Queensland's Sunshine Coast. This was back in 2019, during the Australian summer, December through February. The park was only about 5 years old, built on what used to be sugar cane fields, and it was massive. Wave pools, lazy rivers, a dozen different slides, kids' play areas, the whole works. Most people don't realize water parks need overnight security and maintenance. The pumps run continuously. The water needs to be treated and tested, and someone has to be on site in case of equipment failure. That's where I came in. I was 19, had my bronze medallion and advanced first aid certification, and the overnight shift paid almost double the day rate. 3 nights a week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The job was mostly monitoring equipment and doing water quality tests every 2 hours. I'd walk the park with my testing kit, checking chlorine levels, pH balance, making sure all the filters were running properly. Between tests, I'd hang out in the first aid station, a small building near the main entrance with a desk, medical supplies, and security monitors showing different areas of the park. My trainer was a guy named Brett, who'd been working nights at Pacific Waves since it opened. He was in his 40s, laid back, one of those perpetually sunburned Queenslanders who'd spent his whole life around water. On my second night, as we were doing rounds together, Brett stopped at the wave pool and stared out across the water. The pool was enormous, nearly an acre of water that could generate waves up to 6 feet high during operating hours. At night, with the wave machines off, it was perfectly still, reflecting the lights from around the park like black glass. "You ever feel like someone's watching you?" Brett asked. "What do you mean?" "In the park, at night, you ever get that feeling?" I laughed nervously. "No." "Should I?" Brett was quiet for a moment. "Probably not. I've just been doing this too long. Your mind plays tricks when you're alone." He started walking again, and I followed, but something in his tone bothered me. It wasn't joking. It was almost a warning. I didn't think much about it until my first solo shift the following Thursday. Everything went fine until about 2 a.m. I was in the first aid station, catching up on paperwork, when I heard it through the open window. Splashing, like someone was in one of the pools. I grabbed my flashlight and radio and headed out. The park at night was eerie. All those bright colors and cheerful decorations looked wrong in the darkness, like a carnival after everyone's gone home. The pools glowed with underwater lights, creating shifting patterns on the surrounding concrete. The splashing was coming from the lazy river, a circular current that ran through a half-kilometer loop around the park. During the day, it was packed with people on inner tubes, drifting lazily along. At night, it was supposed to be empty, the current turned off. But someone was in there. I could see the water moving, ripples spreading across the surface. The splashing continued, irregular, frantic. Not like someone swimming for fun. Like someone struggling. "Hey," I shouted, breaking into a run. "The park is closed. You need to get out of the water." I reached the edge of the lazy river and shone my flashlight across the surface. The splashing stopped immediately. The water went still. I swept my light back and forth, searching. Nobody. The river was empty. I stood there for a full minute, watching the water, waiting for someone to surface. Nothing. The only sound was the pumps humming and the distant crash of waves on Markula Beach, maybe 200 meters away. I radioed Brett. He was off shift, but we were supposed to report anything unusual. "Brett, I just heard splashing in the lazy river. Checked it out, nobody there. Any chance someone could have gotten into the park?" Static, then his voice, thick with sleep. "Did you check the security cameras?" "Not yet." "Check those first. If someone's in the park, they would have triggered a gate alarm." Call me back if you find anything. I went back to the first aid station and pulled up the camera footage. 12 different angles covering entrances, pools, and main walkways. I scrolled through the past hour of footage. Nothing. No people. No movement except for palm trees swaying in the breeze and the water in the pools rippling slightly. But at 2:17 a.m., right when I'd heard the splashing, one camera showed something odd. The camera that covered the lazy river had a moment of interference. The image pixelated and broke up for about 15 seconds, then cleared. When it cleared, I could see ripples on the water surface, like something had just disturbed it. I radioed Brett again. Camera glitch at the lazy river right when I heard the splashing. Might be an electrical issue. Probably just a coincidence. If there's no one in the park, don't worry about it. Equipment gets weird sometimes. I tried to take his advice, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The splashing had been too real, too frantic. Someone had been in that water. I finished my shift without further incident, but I kept thinking about it on the drive home. That desperate sound, the way the splashing had stopped the instant I'd called out. The next night, I arrived early and found Brett in the parking lot, getting ready to leave. Hey, before you go, has anyone ever drowned here? In the park, Brett's expression changed. Something guarded came into his eyes. Why are you asking? Just curious. That splashing last night, it sounded like someone in trouble. He sighed and leaned against his car. Look, Sarah, I probably should have told you this before, but I didn't want to freak you out on your first week. Told me what? 2 years ago in January 2017, a kid drowned in the lazy river. 7-year-old boy named Cooper Hayes. He was on a school holiday program, big group of kids, not enough supervision. Somehow he ended up in the water without a tube, got caught in the current. By the time anyone noticed he was missing, it was too late. I felt cold despite the warm evening. That's horrible. Yeah. The park was shut down for a week while they investigated. New safety protocols, more lifeguards, better ratios. But the damage was done. Cooper's family sued, got a big settlement. The park tried to move on, but he trailed off. But what? Look, I don't believe in ghosts or any of that bullshit. But since that kid died, the night shift has been weird. You hear things. I see things. Water moving when it shouldn't. Shadows that don't match any light source. Most of the overnight staff quit within a few months. I've stuck it out because I need the money, but I won't lie. This place feels different after dark. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because management doesn't want to talk about it. Official line is, tragic accident, improved safety measures, move forward. They don't want overnight staff quitting or telling stories that scare customers. So we just deal with it. I should have quit right then. But I was 19 and stubborn, and I needed the money for university. I told myself Brett was just spooked, that there was a rational explanation for everything. I was wrong. My third solo shift started normally. I did my rounds, tested the water, checked the equipment. Everything was functioning perfectly. The park was quiet except for the constant background noise of pumps and filters. Around 1 a.m., I was near the wave pool when I heard a child laughing. It was faint but distinct, a little boy's laugh, delighted and carefree. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the kids' splash area, a shallow pool with water features and small slides designed for young children. I headed that way, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The splash area was empty, the water perfectly still. But as I approached, I heard it again. Closer this time. Laughter, then a splash. "Hello," I called out. "This area is closed. You need to leave." The laughter stopped. In the sudden silence, I became aware of how isolated I was. The park covered 20 acres, and I was completely alone. The nearest building outside the park was at least a kilometer away. I swept my flashlight across the splash area. Nothing, but the water was moving. Small ripples spreading from the center of the pool, like something had just disturbed the surface. I approached the edge and looked down into the shallow water, no more than 60 centimeters deep. The underwater lights illuminated every centimeter of the bottom. Empty, completely empty. But I could see footprints. Small footprints in the algae on the pool floor. Child-sized. Fresh enough that the algae hadn't settled back. The prints led from one side of the pool to the other, then just stopped. I stepped back from the edge, my heart pounding. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't equipment malfunction. Something was in this park. Something that left footprints and laughed and splashed in pools that were supposed to be empty. I should have left. Should have walked straight to my car and driven away. But I thought about Cooper Hayes, 7 years old, drowned in the lazy river while his friends played and no one noticed. "Cooper," I said quietly, "is that you?" The park was silent except for the pumps. Then from behind me, I heard it again. That same laugh, but different now. Not delighted. Lonely. Desperate. I turned around. Standing at the far end of the splash area, partially obscured by a mushroom-shaped water feature, was a small figure. A child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing board shorts and a rash vest. Dripping wet. Staring at me. I couldn't make out his face in the darkness. Just his outline, small and still, water pooling at his feet. "Cooper," I whispered. The figure tilted its head. Then it turned and ran, impossibly fast, toward the lazy river. I chased after it, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I ran. The figure stayed ahead of me, small legs pumping, leaving wet footprints on the concrete that evaporated almost immediately in the warm night air. It reached the lazy river and jumped in. I heard the splash, saw the water erupt. By the time I got to the edge, there was nothing. Just ripples spreading across the surface. I stood there gasping for breath, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The water went still. And then I heard it, muffled, coming from underwater. "Help me. Please. I can't get out." The voice was small and frightened. A child's voice. Coming from the water. I didn't think. I kicked off my shoes and dove in. The water was warmer than I expected, almost unpleasantly warm. I opened my eyes underwater and looked around. The lazy river was lit by underwater LEDs, giving me clear visibility. The current was off, the water still. And there, maybe 3 meters away, I saw him. A boy floating suspended in the water. Not swimming, not sinking, just floating like he was caught in invisible currents. His eyes were closed. His small body was perfectly still. He looked peaceful, like he was sleeping. I swam toward him, reaching out to grab his arm. My fingers closed around his wrist and passed right through. I felt nothing. No flesh, no bone. Just cold. Intense cold that shot up my arm like electricity. I jerked back, swallowing water, kicking frantically for the surface. I broke through coughing and spluttering, my arm throbbing with cold despite the warm water. I scrambled to the edge and pulled myself out, lying on the concrete, gasping. When I looked back at the water, the boy was gone. The lazy river was empty and still, but I could still feel that cold in my arm, spreading from my wrist toward my shoulder. I ran back to the first aid station and locked the door. My wrist was turning blue like frostbite, which was impossible in Queensland in summer. I wrapped it in hot towels and sat shaking, watching the security monitors. At 2:17 a.m., the exact time I'd heard splashing the previous night, every camera in the park went to static simultaneously. For exactly 15 seconds. When they cleared, I could see water disturbed in multiple pools. The wave pool, the lazy river, the splash area. All of them showing fresh ripples. I called Brett. I need you to come back. Now, please. Sarah, what's wrong? I saw him. I saw Cooper. He's in the water. He's still here. Silence on the line. Then I'll be there in 20 minutes. Brett arrived 17 minutes later. I was still in the first aid station, my wrist now wrapped in ice packs because the heat hadn't helped. He took one look at me and knew I wasn't lying. "Show me," he said. We walked through the park together. It was after 3 a.m. now, still dark but with a hint of pre-dawn gray at the horizon. Every pool we passed was disturbed. Ripples, wet patches on the deck, that sense of recent movement. When we reached the lazy river, Brett stopped at the edge and stared down into the water. "Cooper," he said quietly, "Mate, I'm sorry. We're all sorry about what happened. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. Nothing. Just the sound of pumps and filters. You don't have to stay here," Brett continued. "You don't have to keep swimming. It's okay to go." The water began to move. Not violently, gently, like something was stirring beneath the surface. And then I heard the voice again, faint but clear. "I can't find my way out. I keep trying, but I can't get out." Brett's face was pale. "Where are you trying to go, mate?" "Home. I want to go home. But the water keeps pulling me. I can't reach the edge." I understood then. Cooper hadn't just drowned. He'd been caught in the current of the lazy river, unable to reach the sides, going around and around while his strength faded. And somehow, some part of him was still trapped in that experience, still trying to swim to the edge, still calling for help. "The current is off," I said to the water, to Cooper. "There's no current now. You can swim to the edge anytime you want." "I'm scared." "I know. But we're here. We can see you. We can help you." Brett knelt down at the water's edge. "Come on, Cooper. Swim to the side. We've got you." The water stirred. And then slowly, a shape began to form. Not solid, more like a concentration of water, a buoy-shaped disturbance moving through the lazy river. It approached the edge where Brett was kneeling. Brett reached out his hand. "That's it, mate. Almost there. You can do it." The shape reached the edge. I saw small hands, translucent, made of water, reach up and grasp the concrete. Brett's hand passed through them, but he kept it extended, encouraging. "You made it," Brett said softly. "You got out. You did it." The shape pulled itself from the water and sat on the edge for just a moment. I could almost see a face now, a small boy with a gap-toothed smile. He looked at us, and I felt overwhelming sadness and relief radiating from him. "Thank you," the voice whispered. Then he was gone. The shape dissolved, the water went still, and the oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the park lifted. Just like that, the air felt lighter, clearer. Brett and I sat at the edge of the lazy river as the sun started to rise, turning the sky pink and orange over the Pacific. Is he gone? I asked. I think so. I think he just needed someone to help him get out. To tell him it was okay. I looked at my wrist. The blue was fading, color returning to normal. The cold was gone. I worked at Pacific Waves for the rest of that summer. I never heard the splashing again, never saw footprints in empty pools, never heard that desperate voice calling for help. Whatever had been trapped in the park was finally free. Brett and I didn't talk much about what happened that night. What was there to say? We'd helped a ghost. We'd given a dead child permission to stop swimming and go home. I'm in my second year of university now, studying marine biology. I don't work at water parks anymore. But sometimes, when I'm at the beach, I think about Cooper Hayes. I hope he found his way home. I hope he's not scared anymore. And I think about all the other places where people died suddenly, tragically, without understanding what happened. All the ghosts that might be trapped, endlessly repeating their last moments, unable to find their way out. Sometimes death isn't clean. Sometimes people don't move on right away. Sometimes they get stuck, confused and frightened, calling for help that doesn't come. Until someone hears them. Until someone reaches out a hand and tells them it's okay to stop fighting. It's okay to let go. Cooper was 7 years old. He drowned on a sunny January day while his friends played nearby. And for 2 years he swam in circles, trying to find the edge, trying to get home. Until the night someone finally helped him out of the water.